Hey everybody! Today I am working on my Sunshine Daydream Quilt. This is a quilt designed by Stacy Day using Tula Pink's fabric from her Daydreamer line. This quilt has a lot of points in it, which can make it kind of intimidating, but you're using paper piecing, machine paper piecing, which makes it so easy to get these beautiful, perfect points, like I'll show you. I've created 7 of the 8 pieces I need for this very center section here, and you can see how pretty my points are because using the paper piecing makes it so easy. So don't be intimidated. I'm going to do just a really quick video. I'm going to go through making one entire section of this to show you how easy it is. So let me show you. I need to be a little strategic here because I don't want to show any of the measurements in this quilt so that I don't violate any types of copyright infringements. But you can see from this section of the instructions that I'm putting together this. Well, if you look at this and you look at this, the picture looks opposite from the way you're going to be sewing this piece together, and it's designed that way for a reason. And I'm going to go through how to put this together to end up with this piece. Because what you're actually doing is you're flipping this. When you sew it onto your fabric, it's going to be upside down. So it does make the piece come out to look like this if you follow the directions. So in the directions of the quilt, these are my D pieces and these are my Q pieces. So the Q is the teal and the D is the orangish cloud looking pieces. So the first thing I do for the very first piece, and only this very first piece, you want your right sides together. I'm going to draw myself a 1/4 inch line just to make it easy for me to line up on my paper. So if I take my add a quarter ruler, if you don't have an add a quarter ruler, I recommend you get one because it does make paper piecing so much simpler. If you have it, you're going to use it a lot. If you don't have an add a quarter ruler, you can just use a regular ruler with a 1/4 inch line, but it's just easier with the add a quarter. So now that I've got my line drawn here, I'm going to line it up. This is my very first sewing line. We are actually going to sew on this line on the paper. So I want to kind of line this up the best that I can with that line I just drew. Really simple. You don't have to flip anything. You just need to pick it up, head over to your sewing machine, which we're going to do right now. I'll realign it when we get there just to make sure I stay all lined up. Get it ready. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but you really want good 1/4 inches. Adjust my camera here because it's going to be hard for you to see from the angle of my camera. I'll try to see if I can adjust you up here so you can kind of see my actual sewing. All right, so here we go. I've got my piece lined up. I'm going to sew actually on that line on the paper. Let me get my foot down. And I will try to adjust. Also, you want to shorten your stitch length. My machine has a standard, I think it's 2.5 inch stitch length. I've shortened it to 2. And you're going to sew directly on this line. Go as slow or as fast as you're comfortable with. Just try to really stay on that line. That's going to make your points. All right, so we are done with the first 2 pieces. Now I'm going to come over to my iron, which has conveniently turned itself off. So let me turn it on. Should still be hot enough though for me to press my piece. So we've got our piece. I'm going to press it with my iron. You can add just a squirt of steam, but it's not necessary to do that. You really don't want to get your paper wet. So if you can avoid the steam, that's great. You just really want to press that out. So your goal here is to make sure this is your Q fabric. You want to be sure that your fabric is completely covering that space, the teal color, and it is. So now let's come over here. Now we're going to trim. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to take a look at the next sewing line, which is going to be this line right here. You're going to fold this paper back on that line. You'll be able to see it through the paper. Just fold it really, really good on that line. You can unfold it just to make sure you're on the line when you fold it, and you are. This is where that add a quarter ruler comes in handy. You're going to take your add a quarter ruler and you're adding a 1/4 inch fabric. You're trimming everything else away. Get rid of all the bulk that you don't need in your quilt. Trim that off. So we want 1/4 inch away from the next sewing line. Let's unfold this, flip it over. You can see we're already starting our fabric. The other thing I want to do is I try to trim my piece as I go. You can wait till you get all the pieces sewed down and then trim, but for me it's just easier to trim as I go. If you wait till you get all the way to the end, you have a lot of fabric that's not attached to anything that could shift when you're trying to trim. You could make a mistake and trim too much. So if you do that, I recommend you stick a little glue around the edges and glue it down to the fabric before you try to cut it off. But I just try to trim as I go, and it saves me a little bit of hassle from that. There's some particular angles in this quilt that you want to keep. I use my ruler where I have straight edges, and then on these curved edges I just go really slow. Be careful you don't cut your fingers, be careful you don't cut your pattern or too much away from your material. Alright, so I've got it all trimmed up. This is what it's looking like on the back side. I'm going to take my next piece, which is my next orange piece that goes directly on the teal piece, right sides together. You want your right sides together, you're just lining it up. You're going to flip this back over carefully. Oops, and I messed that up. I just like to hold it with both fingers, it makes it easier. And now I'm going to go to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew on that second line. I should have at least 1/4 inch of both pieces of fabric underneath that sewing line. So let's get here and get ready to sew this piece down. And again, sorry, I have to adjust my camera again. I'm going to sew directly on that second line. I know this is repetitious. I'm just going to be repeating myself back and forth to sew all 6 pieces that go here. Just a little tiny shot of steam. Again, we want to make sure that the D fabric, which is the orange fabric, is completely covering that section, which it is. That's all we need. I'm going to come back here. I'm going to fold this on the 3rd sewing line. Check my fold. I'm off a little there, so I want to adjust that. The biggest thing is to make sure you don't cut away too much fabric. It's okay if you don't cut away enough, but once you cut away too much, you can't undo that. And all these little scraps, I don't keep all these little scraps. I have so many scraps, I will never live long enough to use them all. So if you want to keep your scraps, feel free. Let me trim this. Stay consistent here. There's just no point in keeping every little teeny scrap. All right. Now we're going back to our next teal piece. Same thing, we're going to line right sides together. On the solid colors, it's really kind of hard to distinguish what's right side and wrong side because it looks the same on both sides. But on your printed pieces, it's obvious. So we're going to flip that over, go to our sewing machine, sew on line number 3. And it doesn't matter if you go 6 to 1 or 1 to 6, any order. I know you can't see my machine here because I did not adjust my camera, but I'm just going to go with it. Just for the sake of saving a little bit of time. Alright, so we have sewn line 3. Same process. I'm going to flip this, press it. Oops, a little too much steam there. I do not want to get my paper wet. I've done that and it's okay. You just need to dry it out a little bit because you don't want to rip your paper before you're ready to remove it. Alright, now I'm folding on line 4, which will be our next sewing line. So we'll fold that back. We will trim that off to the 1/4 inch again. Trim out my excess that I don't need. Again, if you do it this way, just be very careful you don't cut your fingers. rotary blades are sharp enough to actually cut your finger off. If you're not comfortable doing it that way, like I said earlier, just put a little bit of glue between the paper and the fabric so that it'll stay, and take your scissors and cut that out so that you don't cut your finger. All right, so now we are on to our next and last final orange piece. Again, make sure your right side's down. If you sew right side up, you're gonna have to rip it out and do it again. We don't want that. Let me flip this over. You can pin as well if it's easier for you to hold things with a pin. For me, this is just simply holding it with my fingers to go back and forth to my sewing machine. And we only have 2 more sewing lines, and actually now we're down to the one after I finish this trim job. Press. One final line to sew. So let me fold it back on the line that I'm going to be sewing on. You can see. Trim away the excess. Again, this is just about removing bulk. You don't want all of this bulk in your quilt. There are so many pieces in this quilt. Every area we can remove any bulk, we need to do that. Helps your quilt lay flat. Trim that out really carefully. Be very careful that you don't cut away the pattern and too much fabric underneath that, or it will distort your pieces. All right, final piece. Then all we have to do is trim everything. Let me sew this one in. Okay. So now all we have to do is trim the piece and rip the paper out, and we will be done. So for this quilt, you make 8 of these. This was my final one to make, and then I will be sewing these pieces together to make the first ring. And the rest of this quilt involves the same type of strategy, using the paper piecing, putting your pieces together, sewing them just like I just did with this one, and trimming and adding. Oops, see there? I got a little close off my pattern, but it's okay. Now that I'm done with that, as you can see, there's my piece. All I have to do is rip the paper out. We don't need this paper anymore. So, another point is, if you think you want to make more than one of these quilts, it comes with all of the templates and the foundation pieces like this that you need. So if you're going to plan on maybe in the future making another quilt using this pattern, even if it's not the same fabrics, you have to make a copy. Make a copy of your foundation pieces in order to be able to do that. So what I did was I just took one of each foundation piece and made a copy of it and wrote myself a note of how many of those pieces I need to make the quilt. And voila, there's our beautiful piece. So the next foundation piece I have will be this one, and I'll be doing the same process. I'll have my 2 little pieces of fabric, I'll sew them together, I'll trim everything, and we will start putting this quilt together. So hopefully this is helpful, and hopefully it takes some of the fear out of paper piecing or doing a quilt that looks very complicated. And I hope that you check back in with me again. Thanks for watching. Bye.